Hi, my name is Douglas Hamilton. I'm currently a parish minister in the parish of Traprain in East Lothian. I'm a fairly new minister, having been ordained and inducted a couple of years ago. And prior to being a minister, I worked mainly in the charity sector, latterly in a few senior leadership roles. My experience of navigating change at work included leading a restructure of a large national organisation that involved changes in strategy and structures that led to office closures and redundancies as part of a move towards a more focused and impactful organisation. At home, I've navigated my way through a lot of changes over the last few years as I began to explore my call into ministry and a whole change in career and change in moving house and these situations. And then since beginning my ministry here, I've also had experience of navigating change in the church as they get settled into a new union, having a new minister, and new things happening regularly as a result of that. My understanding of change processes has developed through all these experiences. Well, the context and impact's been different. The scale of the change has varied. There's a few things that I have learned that I think are useful to take into other contexts, and this learning has been useful for me whether I'm someone who's leading or facilitating a change process, or whether I'm also in the midst of changes that are being led by others. At the start of the change process, there's a few things that I think are helpful to think about. Beginning with, it would be important for me to be clear about what the outcome needs to be. What is it we're actually trying to achieve here? There's a reason why changes need to take place, and it's helpful if there's a shared vision. If not, then maybe more work needs to be done to get some clarity on that. And sometimes there might not be a consensus on a shared vision at all, and it's important to recognise that. There may be some people involved in the change process who are not on board with the outcome that we're working towards, never mind the elements of change that are required to get you there. So with the organisational restructure I was involved in, one of the outcomes was to reduce the number of projects that we were involved in. But there were some stakeholders who disagreed that this was necessary, and as a result they struggled with the whole process. It leads to another key issue, which is being clear who's making the final decisions. I've always found it better to engage a wide range of people in the process of change, to consult widely, listen to ideas, take seriously their hopes and their fears. But it's important to distinguish between opinions and decisions. I often heard people querying a decision that was made on the basis that they and their colleagues made it clear this was not what they wanted. It doesn't mean they weren't heard, it just meant that those making the decisions had opted for something different. It'd be great if we could get to a position that pleased everyone, but that's rare. And compromise doesn't always take us to the best outcome. And so it's the role of the decision makers to make that call, and it's important to know who are the people that are making those decisions. When it came to managing a change process, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is the importance of communication. Keep communicating all the way through, and then communicate again. Let people know what the process is. Feedback regularly, update on any changes. It's better to over communicate rather than allow gaps to develop where people start making up their own story as to what's going on. Learn to be as transparent as it can be. Can't always say everything that's happening, but be as transparent as you can be and correct misconceptions, correct mistakes that are being made, and communicate in a range of ways. Some people hear it better face to face, others take it in when reading or watching a video. Key thing is just to keep communicating and keep communicating regularly. One of the big challenges that I faced in the restructuring change that I led was that my role was to facilitate the change, and I wasn't there to pursue my own agenda. In fact, I began to find it more helpful to put myself, my own preferences to one side in order that I could help others navigate the change. And this was to the extent, actually, that I didn't even know whether I would have a job at the end of the process. There was a good chance that the process I was leading could lead to me being made redundant. But if I focused in on that, there was no way that I could fulfill the task that I had been asked to do. Links back, I think, to the importance of being clear about roles in a change process. Who's making the decisions, who's facilitating the process, who's being consulted. Putting our own interest to one side may be necessary if the overall outcome is going to be better for the organisation and the people that we serve. And I think this is something the church should be better at. But my experience with change in the church so far is that the self-interest can often dominate discussions, and that just creates a huge barrier in moving forward. We need to learn more about how to put ourselves to one side. Another challenge is the emotional element of change. Change is not just a functional process, it's one that can generate a lot of emotion, and it means that people's responses aren't necessarily reasoned, particularly if the change is going to involve loss, uncertainty, or a sense of failure. The emotional response is often understandable, but it doesn't mean that you don't follow through just because you know it's going to cause upset. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do at work was to take people through an enforced redundancy process, knowing the impact it was going to have on them and their families and on others who relied on them or their services. But the impact of not making those hard decisions had significant longer term implications for many, many others. And the emotional response couldn't necessarily drive the decision, but there was a huge need for compassion and sensitivity, just doing everything I could and we could to minimise the impact on those who were directly affected by the change. The main encouragement I can offer to anyone navigating change at the moment is not to give up, particularly when you know that the change is necessary for the longer term mission. Keep communicating, keep people involved all the way through, but also don't shy away from the fact there's always going to be people who are going to find decisions challenging. So it's important to approach any change process with love, with compassion, sensitivity, acknowledging that we may need to put our own interests to one side for the benefit of the longer term outcomes.